His hand moved slowly under my dress, making my skin feel cold and warm at the same time. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling his body close to mine. His kiss became stronger and deeper. As he started to take off my clothes, I could feel his pants moving too. This is my story. I have been married for 5 years to Daniel. He is a kind and hard-working man who travels a lot for work. We live in a small apartment building where everyone knows each other. One of our neighbors is Félix, who lives across the hall. He is a quiet and single man who doesn't talk much, but always helps when he can. That day, Daniel had been away for 2 days on a work trip to Abuja. He was coming back the next day. I was doing housework as usual. In the early afternoon, after I finished the laundry, the power went out in the whole building. This happens a lot here, but the weather was very hot that day. I opened the windows for some air, then went to the kitchen for a glass of cold water. As I shut the fridge door, I heard a knock. It was Félix. "Hello, Esther. Sorry to bother you, but there's water on my ceiling, and it looks like it's coming from your place." I was surprised, but let him in. We went to check the bathroom. A small stream of water was coming from the pipe under the sink. "Oh, I didn't notice that," I said. "It's okay. Do you have a wrench? I can try to fix it." I looked in the kitchen drawer and gave him the tool. He knelt down to work while I stood by the door watching him. Then something strange happened. He looked up at me and smiled. It was a smile I had never seen before. "You should be careful. The wet floor is slippery," he said gently. I didn't answer. His look made me feel strange, not because it was bad, but because it felt different. There was something strong in his eyes. I turned away, feeling nervous. "I'll go get a mop," I said quickly. I walked out with my heart beating fast. What was that feeling? It wasn't fear. It wasn't desire. It was just a moment that confused me. A few minutes later, Félix finished fixing the pipe. He stood up and cleaned his hands. "It's done. It won't leak anymore." "Thank you," I said, looking away. He nodded and went to the door. He paused, like he wanted to say something, but then just smiled and left. When I closed the door, I sighed deeply. Nothing really happened, but something still felt different. That evening, lying in bed, I thought about it. I saw that sometimes it's not what people do that surprises us. It's the feelings we didn't expect. A small moment can change everything, even if we don't act on it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Félix's eyes, not because they were wrong, but because they made me feel something I couldn't explain. At sunrise, I got up early to clean the house before Daniel came home. I tried to pretend nothing had happened, but each time I passed the bathroom, my heart beat faster. Later that morning, while I was sweeping the living room, I heard a quiet knock. I stopped and took a breath before opening the door. It was Félix. "Good morning, Esther. Sorry to bother you again, but I forgot to return this yesterday." He handed me the wrench. I had forgotten all about it. "Oh, thank you." I took it without looking at him. He didn't leave. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I looked up. He seemed calm, but there was something more behind his look. "Yes, I'm fine," I said too quickly. There was a silence. Then he gave a small smile. "All right. I just wanted to make sure I didn't make you feel bad yesterday." I opened my mouth to speak, but said nothing. In the end, I nodded. "No, it was nothing." "Okay." He stepped back and added, "Your husband comes home today, right?" "Yes, this afternoon." "Then have a nice day, Esther." He turned and went back to his apartment. I stood still, the wrench in my hand, watching his door close. It was nothing. That's what I told myself. That's what I wanted to believe. But I knew something had changed. I didn't know what it meant. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was just a short, strange moment. But one thing was clear. Félix was not just a neighbor anymore. And that was not something I expected. The afternoon came faster than I thought. I cleaned everything, cooked a good meal, and wore a dress that Daniel liked. But even with all this, my thoughts kept going back to Félix. Why did I feel so strange? Why did his smile mean so much when he didn't do anything wrong? I hated that feeling. At around 4 p.m., Daniel came home. As soon as he walked in, he smiled and hugged me. I felt better right away. I held him close and breathed in his familiar smell. He was here, my husband, the man I loved. Everything would be okay again. "I missed you," he said softly. "I missed you too," I answered honestly. We spent the evening talking about his trip. He told me about his meetings, the traffic in Abuja, and the co-workers he had dinner with. I laughed at his stories, listened carefully, and slowly, the strange feeling I had started to go away. Or at least, that's what I thought. A few days later, Daniel left early for work. I was hanging clothes on the balcony when I felt someone looking at me. I turned my head. Félix was standing on his balcony holding a cup of coffee. Our eyes met. I should have looked away and acted like I didn't see him, but I didn't. He smiled. A small, gentle smile. Still, it made me feel uneasy. "Good morning, Esther." "Good morning," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted. There was silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it felt heavy, like we both had something to say, but didn't. Finally, he spoke. "Last night, I heard your husband laughing. He seems like a good man." I was surprised. "He is," I said. Félix drank from his cup, still looking at me. "That's good," he said softly. Then he turned and went back inside. I let out a slow breath. I hadn't realized I was holding it. Why did a short talk feel so strong? I shook my head and went inside, telling myself to stop thinking about Félix. But I knew I was lying. Days passed, but I couldn't feel calm. I told myself that everything was fine, that Félix was just another neighbor. Still, there was a quiet tension between us. I didn't tell Daniel. How could I? Nothing had really happened. Just a few looks. Quiet moments. Times when I stopped breathing for no reason. Then one night, things changed. Daniel came home late, tired. After dinner, he lay on the couch and quickly fell asleep. I stayed up, cleaning the kitchen, but I couldn't relax. The apartment felt too hot. I went out to the balcony to get some fresh air. I shouldn't have. Félix was there, standing on his balcony, holding a cigarette. I had never seen him smoke before. He turned and saw me. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No. You can't either?" He lifted his shoulders a little and took a breath from his cigarette. "Sometimes the night is louder than the day." I didn't know how to answer, but I stayed, looking at him. Then I said, without thinking, "You've changed these last days." He smiled. "So have you." My heart beat faster. He stepped closer to the balcony railing. We were so near that I could almost reach him. Esther. His voice was subtle, maybe a warning. Maybe something else. I didn't know. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Then, the door behind me opened. "Are you outside?" Daniel's sleepy voice ended the silence. I quickly turned around. "Yes, it was warm inside," I said with a smile. He rubbed his face and said, "Come to bed, it's late." I nodded and went back into the apartment, my heart beating fast. Before I closed the door, I looked at Félix one more time. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Something had changed that night, and I knew it couldn't be undone. After that night, things weren't the same. I told myself it was just a short moment. Maybe I was tired or too hot, but I knew that wasn't true. Félix was no longer just a neighbor. He had become a secret, a quiet thought that stayed in my mind. And I felt like he knew it too. In the next few days, I did everything I could to stay away from him. I didn't go out much, looked down when I walked past his door, and stayed busy with housework. Daniel didn't notice anything. He was always busy with his job. I acted normal, but Félix didn't keep away. He was always around. Every time I thought I was alone, I would hear, "Hello, Esther," or see him at the window. He was quiet, but always there. Then, one afternoon, everything changed again. Daniel was at work. I was using the time to clean the whole apartment, hoping the work would calm me. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I already knew it was him. My heart beat fast. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Félix was there, his hands in his pockets. His face looked calm, but his eyes were strong. "Is something wrong?" I asked. I tried to sound calm. "No, nothing," he said. "I just came to return this." He gave me a plastic container. I looked at it. "What is this?" "A dish your husband gave me the other day." I had completely forgotten about the container. I took it from him and quickly tried to close the door, but he placed his hand on the frame, stopping it. "Esther," he said, his voice low and serious. "What?" I whispered, unable to look at him. He waited a second, then said, "You're avoiding me." I felt a knot in my stomach. "No, I'm not." "Then look at me and say that." Slowly, I raised my eyes to meet his. That was a mistake. In the narrow hallway, with silence between us, I realized how close we were to crossing a line we shouldn't. Félix said nothing for a moment. His eyes didn't leave mine. Then he turned, set his drink on the balcony rail, and said quietly, "Come on. It's less lonely when you're not alone." My heart hesitated. I knew I should say no, but I found myself walking toward his open door. His apartment was dim, with only a soft light glowing from a small lamp. A bottle of wine sat on the coffee table. "Would you like something to drink?" he asked gently. I nodded. He sat next to me on the couch, smiling just a little. We talked about nothing important, but it felt easy. Music played softly in the background. There was no awkwardness, but a quiet tension hung in the air. Then slowly, he moved a bit closer. His hand brushed mine, and my breath caught in my throat. I could feel the warmth from his skin. His eyes were still on me. "Esther," he whispered. I could have stood up and walked away, but I didn't move. My thoughts were a mess of confusion, emotion, and something I didn't want to name. He leaned in. I didn't speak, didn't stop him. His hand touched my face gently, and he looked at me like he was asking a question without words. Then very slowly, he kissed me. At first, it was soft, like he was unsure. But when I didn't pull away, the kiss grew deeper. Everything else faded. The room, the music, the world. For a few minutes, there was only us. I let myself forget everything else. We didn't speak. We just stayed close, caught in a moment that felt too big to stop. Then Félix stood up and held out his hand. I knew what it meant. Still, I reached for it. He led me down the hall, and we stopped just outside his room. The door closed quietly behind us, and the rest of the world disappeared. We stood facing each other, not speaking. My heart beat wildly. There was nothing else, just his eyes, his presence, and the quiet between us. He stepped forward. I stepped back until my back met the wall. He placed his hands beside my head, holding me there. Though I didn't want to leave. But before anything more could happen, knock, knock, knock. A loud knock came at the door. I froze. Then, a voice. Félix, it's Daniel. Have you seen Esther? Everything stopped. My breath caught. My heart felt like it might burst. Panic hit me like a wave, drowning all the feelings that had filled the room just seconds before. Félix looked at me. I couldn't read his face. Daniel, my husband, was right outside. He was looking for me. I stood frozen, my back against the wall, eyes wide. The air felt heavy, like I couldn't breathe. Félix didn't move. He kept looking at me, his jaw tight, his hands now lowered but still close. Another knock came, louder this time. Esther, Daniel's voice called again. Are you in there? My body shook. I looked at Félix. I wanted him to say something, to fix this, but he said nothing. His silence made everything louder. I slowly stepped away from the wall and tried to calm my breathing. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to look normal, as if nothing had happened. Félix stepped back, giving me space. I moved toward the door, each step harder than the last. When I reached it, I paused for just a moment, then opened it. Daniel stood there, worry on his face. Relief washed over him when he saw me. There you are, he said. I've been calling you. I couldn't find you in the apartment. I'm sorry, I said quickly. The air inside felt heavy. I just needed a moment. He looked at me, then passed me into Félix's apartment. Were you here long? No, I lied. I did, shaking my head. Just a few minutes. Félix was returning something I forgot. Daniel nodded slowly, not asking more. Okay. I just got back from the office and didn't see you. Let's go. I nodded and followed him out. As I stepped past Félix, I felt his eyes on me. I didn't look back. Inside our apartment, Daniel sat down on the couch, tired but smiling again. I'll take a shower. Then maybe we can order something to eat? Sure, I said. He kissed my forehead and walked into the bathroom. I stood alone in the living room, my thoughts spinning. The quiet of the room felt different now. Heavier, filled with the weight of what almost happened. I told myself I had stopped it in time, but a part of me knew that something had already crossed the line. Félix was no longer just a neighbor. He was a presence I couldn't ignore, and even though I had walked away, I knew nothing would be the same again. That night, Daniel fell asleep quickly. He was tired after work, and soon I could hear his calm breathing beside me. But I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart still heavy. I thought about Félix, his eyes, his silence, the way he had stepped back when Daniel knocked. He hadn't said a word, but his expression had spoken enough. Something had changed between us. And I wasn't sure if I felt guilt, fear, or something else I didn't want to name. I turned to look at Daniel. He looked peaceful in sleep. He trusted me, and I loved him. At least, I believed I did. But something inside me felt broken. Or maybe just different. The next morning, I woke up early. I made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, and folded clothes. Trying to feel normal, trying to remind myself who I was. Daniel smiled and kissed my cheek before leaving for work. "See you tonight," he said. "Don't forget, we have dinner at your sister's." "I remember," I said, forcing a smile. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. A voice inside me kept repeating the same words. "Nothing happened. You stopped it. You did nothing wrong." But it wasn't that simple. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I stepped into the hallway, I paused. Félix's door was closed. I almost expected him to appear again. But he didn't. That day passed slowly. I went through the motions, shopping, cooking, cleaning, but my mind kept drifting back. Every time I thought of that moment in his apartment, my chest tightened. The silence between us now felt louder than words. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. That evening, Daniel and I went to my sister's house for dinner. Everything felt normal. We talked, laughed, and shared stories. No one could see the storm inside me. I smiled when expected. I answered questions. But my mind was far away. When we got home, Daniel went straight to bed. I stayed up, sitting in the dark living room. The apartment was quiet, but I couldn't rest. I kept thinking about Félix, about the moment that almost changed everything, about what I felt, and what I still didn't understand. I told myself I should forget it, that I had a good life, a good man, a home. But there was a restlessness inside me that wouldn't go away. The next morning, I saw Félix again. I was throwing out the trash when I heard the door behind me open. I turned, and he was there. For a moment, we didn't say anything. Then he spoke, quietly. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you." I looked away. "You didn't." There was a pause. I could feel the weight of his presence again. Not threatening, just too close, too real. "You haven't looked at me since," he said. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." I finally looked up. His face was calm, but serious. "That night," I began, then stopped. I didn't know how to finish. "I know," he said simply. We stood in silence again. A silence full of words we couldn't speak. Then he gave a small nod. "Take care, Esther." He turned and walked back into his apartment. Closing the door behind him, I stood there a little longer. The hallway felt empty, but something remained. Not a secret, not exactly guilt, but something unspoken, left behind like a shadow. That was the last time we talked for a while. Life went on. I kept my distance. He respected it, but even when we didn't speak, even when we didn't look at each other, I could still feel the memory of that moment between us. Quiet, hidden, but alive. Weeks passed. The weather changed. The heat of summer began to fade, and soft winds filled the air. Life seemed quiet again. On the outside, everything was normal, but inside, something was still unsettled. I avoided Félix as best I could. I changed the times I left the apartment. I stayed busy. I told myself I was moving on, but I couldn't forget. One evening, Daniel came home early. He looked tired, but happy to be back. We had dinner together, and as we were clearing the table, he paused and looked at me. "You've been quiet lately," he said. I felt a chill in my chest. "I've just been tired," I replied quickly. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "Everything's fine." But his eyes stayed on me. He knew something had changed, even if he didn't know what. Later that night, I stood by the window, looking at the lights across the street. Our building stood still, quiet. One window caught my attention, Félix's. It was dark. For the first time in weeks, I felt disappointed. I turned away, angry at myself for feeling that way. I walked quietly back to the bedroom. Daniel was already asleep. I lay beside him, staring into the dark. That's when I knew. Something in me had shifted. I was no longer the same woman I had been, not because of what had happened, but because what almost had. Days turned into weeks. I began to move through my days as if I were watching someone else live my life. I cooked, cleaned, smiled, and talked when I had to, but inside, I felt like I was walking through fog. Nothing felt clear anymore. Daniel remained kind and steady. He still made me laugh. He still kissed my forehead in the mornings. But I found it harder to meet his eyes. Some nights, I would wake up without knowing why. I would sit in the dark, my hands shaking slightly, and try to slow my breathing. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but the feeling stayed with me. One afternoon, I was in the grocery store when I saw something that made me stop. A man stood near the bread section. He was wearing a blue shirt and holding a coffee in his hand. For a second, I thought it was Félix. My heart jumped, but it wasn't him. Still, I left the store without finishing my shopping. Later, as I walked home, I asked myself, why am I still thinking about him? Why does something that never truly happened still feel so heavy? I had no answers, only feelings I didn't want. That evening, I stood at the sink, washing dishes. Daniel was reading in the living room, the sound of pages turning, mixed with the soft clink of dishes in water. The moment felt too normal, too still, and suddenly, I wanted to cry. Not because of guilt, not because of anything Félix had done, but because I felt like I had lost a part of myself, and I didn't know how to get it back. I looked at Daniel. He glanced up and smiled. "Everything okay?" I smiled back. "Yes, just tired." And in that moment, I realized something else. I wasn't lying to protect him anymore. I was lying to protect the part of me that didn't want to admit what I was feeling. That was the real storm. Not Félix, not the kiss. It was the part of me that had changed, and the fear that I would never go back to the woman I used to be. Over the next few weeks, something between Daniel and me began to change. Slowly, quietly, but clearly. He didn't say anything at first. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning. He still asked how my day was when he came home. But I noticed the small things. He didn't joke as much. He didn't talk about his work like he used to. Sometimes he would look at me for a long time, as if trying to understand something I wasn't saying. And I wasn't. I answered him with short replies. I smiled without feeling it. When he touched my hand or pulled me close, I would stiffen without meaning to. He noticed. One night, after dinner, he looked at me and said softly, You feel far away lately. I looked down at my plate. I'm just tired. He didn't argue. He just nodded, but the sadness in his eyes stayed with me. Later that night, we lay in bed without speaking. His back was turned. I watched him in the dark, my chest full of guilt. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to tell him the truth, or at least part of it, but I didn't know how to start. I didn't even know what I wanted him to understand. The next day, Daniel left early for work. Before closing the door, he hesitated. I'll be home late, he said. I nodded. Okay. He waited, as if hoping for something. Maybe a kiss, maybe a word. But I stayed still. When the door closed behind him, I sat down in the kitchen and stared at the table. Something was breaking. And it wasn't because of Félix. It was because I had stopped showing up. I was here, but I wasn't present. My heart was somewhere else, confused and silent, and I didn't know how to bring it back. Daniel hadn't changed, but I had, and now we were no longer walking together. The days that followed were filled with silence, not loud or angry, just quiet. Daniel and I moved around each other like shadows. We spoke when needed, but never about what truly mattered. I kept telling myself I needed more time. Time to think. Time to feel something clear. But the longer I waited, the more distant we became. One evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen, cutting vegetables for dinner. He walked in and stood by the counter, watching me. I saw Félix this morning, he said suddenly. My hands froze. Oh, he said hello, asked how we were. I looked at the cutting board. That was nice of him. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then quietly, he asked, Is there something I should know, Esther? My heart felt heavy in my chest. I wanted to lie, to protect him, to protect myself, but something inside me said no. Not this time. There was almost something, I said, still not looking at him. But it didn't happen. The silence that followed was deeper than any we had shared before. Do you love him? He asked. No, I said. I don't even know him. But you let it come close. I nodded. Yes. He sat down slowly, his face calm, but tired. Why? I don't know, I said honestly. I think I stopped feeling like myself. And for a moment, it felt like something new, something alive. Daniel leaned back, looking at the ceiling. You could have told me. I didn't know how. We sat there for a long time. No shouting, no tears, just two people sitting with the truth. Finally, he stood up. I think we both need space. I looked up. Are you leaving? No, he said. Not yet, but we can't pretend anymore. I nodded. That night, I slept on the couch. The house felt cold, even though the air was warm. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the small choices that led here. The next morning, I opened the windows. I let in the air. I made coffee. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Daniel and I would heal, or if this was the beginning of the end. But for the first time in a long time, I felt honest, with him and with myself. And sometimes, that's where true endings begin. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. What would you do in Esther's place? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who appreciates stories that explore love, silence, and choices that shape our lives. And remember, Sometimes the most powerful moments are the quietest ones. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an emotional English story. Thanks for watching.